If you heard there was a painting that could cause psychotic breaks if you looked at it, could you resist taking a peek? Welcome to the Frail Blaze. Cell 11. Yes, I was arrested. It's been at least 5 years since I served my debt to society and tried to live a normal life. Don't think I'm trying to make excuses and repeat a well-known cliché, but I really had a rough childhood. I lost my father in a work accident, and shortly after my mother succumbed to alcoholism. If I wanted to eat, I had to learn to beg or steal. So, it wasn't hard to get involved in more serious things, dangerous groups, and bad influences. That's the recipe for ending up in jail at 21. Even though I had some run-ins with the police and even spent a night or two at a local precinct cell, nothing prepared me for what I would face behind bars. I got there and I felt weak, like the kid that I was. Just a child who'd barely left diapers and already thought he ruled the block. There were many internal rules there, and you'd be surprised how respectful men who broke the law could be with each other. There were certain ethical norms, and in cases of disrespect, the court came into play. The court was formed by Francis, the boss of a faction, and some of his trusted men. They judged some issues and decided punishments. Punishments which could range from doing the laundry for the guy you offended for the week to something heavier. The guards didn't even bother, actually. It seemed to work well and saved them the trouble, and in return, Francis and his buddies received some perks, like cigarettes and chocolates. Some of the most notable rules in jail were: never cut in line in the cafeteria, don't touch others' things without permission, and don't respect other inmates' visits. All of this seemed normal and reasonable, but there was one specific rule that bothered me. Never look at the painting on the wall of Cell 11. I remember hearing some murmurs down the corridor from time to time, but the first time I understood the issue was on the night when old Munford was telling his stories. Old Munford was a card-carrying swindler, used to deceive people with a mask of senility, and, as you might expect, prison was a goldmine for him, where his skills of smooth talk and diplomacy fit well, along with, of course, an excellent talent for storytelling to pass the nights when it was too hot to sleep early. That particular night, the conversation revolved around the unwritten rules of prison, and that's when Munford mentioned the mysterious rule of Cell 11. "Listen up, lads," he said, with a tone of seriousness that grabbed everyone's attention. "In Cell 11, there's a painting on the wall, and there's a very clear rule about it. Never, under any circumstances, look directly at it." The murmurs spread throughout the circle of inmates. It was painted by a guy who passed through here a long time ago for killing his own mother. He was locked up in solitary confinement in Cell 11, and during a psychotic episode, he used something that no one really knows what it is to paint the eye. They say that since then, strange things happen to those who defy this rule, from terrible nightmares to all-out disappearances. "All right, old man, enough scaring the ladies," Francis's voice interrupted, and I swear I could see some inmates jump in fright. Some colleagues nervously laughed, trying to dissipate the heavy atmosphere that had settled. I, on the other hand, couldn't shake those words from my head. The painting in Cell 11, the psychotic murderer, the stories of nightmares and disappearances, all of it intrigued me in a way that I hadn't expected. That night, lying in my own cell, the thought of the painting haunted me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something sinister loomed over that macabre art. Days passed, and I did my best to avoid any mention of Cell 11, even though I thought about it all the time. It was a kind of obsession mixed with fear and apprehension. I longed to know more, but I didn't have the courage to ask. However, fate, or perhaps my own impudence, decided to play with me. I was playing basketball on one of the sports nights we had at the yard, when Bob, a big, tall guy, threw himself against me to prevent a basket I was about to make. I felt my body collide with Bob's, and for a moment, air seemed to have been sucked out of the room. I found myself awkwardly falling to the ground, the sounds of my body hitting the concrete echoing in my mind. As I tried to catch my breath, I saw Bob's face, contorted in a mixture of anger and triumph. He knew he had taken me down. I took a deep breath, ignoring the throbbing pain spreading through me, and struggled to get up. Bob was laughing, a guttural sound that seemed to resonate in my ears. It only fueled my irritation. I wanted to retaliate, but I knew it would only result in bigger problems. So I swallowed my very wounded pride and moved on, trying to focus on the game. But when the game ended and everyone began to disperse, I felt a heavy gaze upon me. It was Bob, staring at me with a disturbing intensity. I frowned, feeling uncomfortable with the way he was watching me. It wasn't as if I had never faced intimidating stares before, but there was something different about the way he was looking at me, something that sent shivers down my spine. I tried to ignore him and move on, but his presence hung over me like a shadow. As I walked away from the court, I felt a chill run down my spine. I decided to head back to my cell, hoping to find some peace and quiet in there, but upon arrival, I was met with an unpleasant surprise. The guard responsible for the corridor, Tully, was standing in front of cell 11, with the door open and staring inside, mouth agape. "Hey, Tully," I asked, approaching at a safe distance. Guard Tully?" I leaned towards him. Suddenly, his neck jerked. His face slowly began to turn to face me. Now the moonlight caught his face very well, illuminating the pale skin that reflected like a beacon in that dark corridor. I could see now the tear streaks down his cheeks, his eyes staring at me with an irritated red hue, as if he hadn't blinked in some time. Without changing his expression, a scream poured from his throat, along with a thick strand of saliva. My legs started to tremble as I watched that surreal scene unfold before me. Part of me wanted to run away as fast as possible, but another part was paralyzed in fear and morbid curiosity. What the hell was happening to him? Tully continued to stare at me with bloodshot eyes, emanating that shrill scream that echoed through the empty prison corridors. I could feel my heart pounding irregularly in my chest as my mind tried to figure out a logical explanation for all of it. The guard then staggered towards me with a wobbly step and placed his hand on my shoulder. I felt the grip tightening. "Tully, please," I said louder, not to him, but to see if I would attract the attention of someone else who could help. He put the other hand up as well, even stronger, his face now inches from mine, allowing me to smell an acidic odor emanating from his hoarse voice. Now his nails digging into my uniform, and I could hear them entering my skin, tearing. "Stop, please." My screams attracted another guard, who intervened in the situation before things got even more out of control. It took 2 more colleagues to get him off of me, and 3 more to take him away from there. While I remained trembling and trying to process what had just happened, my whole body was tense, muscles contracted by fear and adrenaline. I couldn't get the image of Tully's face out of my mind. My mind automatically returned to the stories Munford had been telling about Cell 13 and the picture on the wall. Did that have any connection to what I'd just witnessed? Was there really something painted in there? I looked at the open door, the number 11 engraved on it. It seemed to invite me, to mess with me. I could go there and see what's inside the cell. No one would need to know, right? I found myself raising my hand without even realizing it, heading towards the door, ready to open it just a little more and see inside of the cell, when a voice echoed behind me in the corridor, calling my name. I jumped out of the trance, startled, and turned to see the nurse who was calling me to be taken to the infirmary. "These are pretty nasty injuries," she commented, examining the wounds. It was nothing." I tried to sound tough. The only thing I noticed was the surreal beauty of the woman I hadn't seen before. I saw the name Linda pinned on her badge. "I've been through much worse on the streets, Linda." "Miss Linda," she corrected, tightening the bandage knot with a hint of annoyance at the taunt. I let out a small ouch of discomfort, and I could see a small smile forming on her face. "And Tully?" I continued, trying to change the subject. He seemed strange, very strange tonight." Linda's expression instantly changed upon hearing the guard's name, her eyes darkening slightly, and a shadow of concern crossing her face. "We still don't have much information. It seemed like a psychotic episode. We had to sedate him." She shook her head, pointing to the stretcher behind me, where he now lay peacefully, in contrast to moments before. "A psychotic episode," I repeated, my voice sounding more like a whisper than I would have liked. Does that happen here often?" Linda hesitated for a moment, as if pondering what to say. "Not so often, but it happens," she finally replied, carefully choosing her words. "The environment in here can be challenging for some. Not everyone is able to handle the pressure." A guard entered, requesting the girl's services for a sick inmate. She quickly adjusted the IV in my veins and bid me farewell, saying that I would be under observation that night. That early morning in the infirmary was long and restless, as I lay on the stretcher, watching the shadows dance on the walls in the dim light of the lamp. My mind was in turmoil. The image of Tully's contorted face, his red and empty eyes, continued to haunt my thoughts. Whenever I tried to close my eyes, that memory came back, until, irritated, I decided that I would sleep one way or another. I began to ignore the thoughts and try to induce sleep, no matter how shallow. Gradually, I calmed down, clearing that terrible picture from my mind when I felt something strange. A tingling sensation took over my body. I felt my face start to warm up, and a familiar smell in the air. I could smell that acidic odor coming from Tully's mouth. Now, it's right in my nose. I started to tremble, the palms of my hands sweating as I thought it was a vivid nightmare. Oh, that was wishful thinking. I opened my eyes only for my heart to race abnormally. There, with his face almost lying on mine, with his eyes glazed and his mouth wide open in a silent scream, was Tully, standing over me. I could see the empty stretcher and the sheets on the floor. On his arm, the needle, now disconnected from the IV, dripped blood all over the floor, in a darker tone than normal. Panic took hold of me as I stared at the surreal scene before my eyes. I wanted to do something, scream for help, but it was as if I was in sleep paralysis. I wanted to get out of there as fast as possible. My throat seemed closed, as if fear had completely taken over me. Tully remained there, motionless like a statue, with those empty eyes and that mouth opened in a silent scream, blood slowly dripping from his disconnected needle, forming small dark puddles on the infirmary floor. Finally, after an eternity, I managed to gather the strength to move. With a tremendous effort, I reached for the button that called for help and pressed it with all my might. Soon the guards came running towards me, and I pointed to that flesh statue, trying to explain what had happened. They quickly took control of the situation, removing Tully from the infirmary and calling a medical team to check his condition. I still wake up occasionally, trembling, sweating, with the image of that guard staring down at me. On some warmer nights, I swear I can even smell that odor escaping from his mouth. I returned to my cell the next day, and Tully never returned to duty. They say he spent the rest of his days in a mental institution, but at the moment, considering all of my ignorance, I could only wonder one thing as I stared at those metal bars. What the hell is in cell 11? Interesting. I wonder just how good that picture on the wall is. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. Would you be able to resist taking a peek? Tooth Fairy. Will the Tooth Fairy really come tonight? Aiden asked, exhausted. Yes, honey, his mother answered, gently closing his door. Lights off and recently lost baby teeth stuffed under his pillow, Aiden drifted into sleep. He awoke suddenly to the sound of buzzing and scratching. Aiden opened his eyes, making out a pair of large cicada-like wings in the dark. A muscled, veiny hand crept towards his face, his fallen-out teeth in its gray palm. Do you like my teeth? Aiden asked, with a growing grin. It smiled back. Wrong teeth, it rasped, pointing its jagged nail at Aiden's smile. Short and very much sugary sweet. So much so that it might be bad for the teeth, that story. But let me know what you thought in the comments beneath. Speaking of stories, as ungrateful as you maggots are, I will give you your third one now. This one is called Paranoia. After a long day, I could use some rest, and walking home would also take a lot of time from my already short personal hours. The meeting sucked up a lot of my time, and I ended up missing the last bus by a good deal of minutes. I ruefully decided to walk. The path was empty as far as I could see, except for a group of homeless people huddled around a dumpster fire. It was 1 a.m, and nobody wanted to be out there on the cold street. I sucked in the cold air and continued down the road, a little cautious as I passed by the group. I was taught by my father to always watch my back, and I usually came home late, so I'd gotten adept at it. All sorts of situations passed through my head, but all for naught. The group seemed harmless, and half of them were asleep. I walked past stores that I'd never noticed when I rode the bus. It was like discovering the place all over again. Most of the buildings were closely packed because of the rising property prices. The long lane of stores were a brief respite from the surrounding darkness. The neon lights shaded the roads in a cacophony of colors. The only thing that remained unchanged was the lack of people. The stores were locked, except for a convenience store that was 24 hours. Might as well grab something to eat, I thought to myself. The door opened and announced my presence with a chime. At the counter I saw a teenager browsing through his phone. The guy gave me a glance before shifting his attention back to his phone. I picked up some of my favorite late-night snacks and paid the disinterested teen in cash. After a long walk in silence, I finally reached my doorstep. I had been living in this house for a year now, but due to the daily travel time, I've started thinking about moving somewhere closer to the office. I checked my pockets, and after finding my keys, I unlocked the door. Normally, I would shower, but today I just changed my clothes and went straight into my blankets. I swiped through my college friends' chat to keep up with them. As I grew drowsy, I received a notification. Unknown. Did you check the door lock? Followed by several smiley faces. My heart raced as all of my tiredness vanished. I picked up a steel flask and carefully made my way towards the door. I tried locking it only to find that it was already locked. I peered through the keyhole and found no one. I wouldn't have opened the door even if I'd seen someone. I'm definitely reporting this fucker tomorrow. I walked back to my room and picked up my phone in order to check the number. I saw that there was already something else there. It was from unknown. Did you check under the bed? Could someone be watching me? I could see from where I was, but I confirmed it by leaning down that there was absolutely no one under the bed. Before I could scream in frustration, I received yet another notification. Look who's behind you. And I heard a creak on the floor. I know I've said this before, but that was short and definitely not sweet. A little too realistic of a situation in some corners of this globe. I wonder how they got in. But anyway, let me know what you think in the comments beneath. The story is called A Brief Encounter with Something Strange. I've always had trouble sleeping. Between my history of insomnia, a recent breakup, and starting a new job, I was disappointed but unsurprised when I woke up around 2 a.m. a week ago. I made a half-hearted attempt to get back to sleep, but my bladder had other ideas. As I stepped back into the bedroom after relieving myself, a white light caught my eye. It's not unusual for lights from my PC or the streetlights outside to shine into my bedroom from the living room, but this was much brighter, and it was a natural white. It was streaming in through the blinds of my window. My immediate thought was that it must be a car outside. As I woke up a bit more, I realized that the light was coming from above the window. I walked over and parted the blinds slightly. Nothing seemed out of place on the street. I scanned down the road and up the road before turning my gaze upwards, and I found the source of the light. It was a distant figure that was small in stature and floating well above the rooftops. I wasn't entirely certain if it was a child or something else. Its skin was gray and pale, and it didn't appear to be wearing any clothing. The figure looked thin. Its eyes were beyond black. They were voids. It was as if this figure had two black holes for eyes. To its left was a tractor trailer. It seemed to me that it was looking at it intently. The trailer was floating perfectly still with a dim white halo around it. The truck was dangling by its fifth wheel from the trailer. I watched, transfixed for ages, as the figure performed an inspection of the truck, spinning it as needed to observe every surface. As I looked on, I noticed that the figure wasn't in any sort of craft. It appeared to only have its bubble of light around it. I also observed that there wasn't a bit of light coming from anywhere else in the neighborhood, except for this figure. Even the 24-hour gas station and convenience store down the hill was pitch black. I turned my gaze back to the figure. It was now looking at me. The truck gently descended as the light behind the figure formed a spotlight. It crept across the street and toward my house. I was frozen in place. The light moved up my front steps, and as it reached the doorknob lock and deadbolt snapped to the locked position. I was able to tear myself away from the sight of the thing and try the door, but the locks wouldn't budge. I sprinted back to my bedroom. I kept a revolver in a lockbox in the closet. Gun in hand, I cautiously moved back into the living room. I remember nothing else. Everything went dark. I awoke the next morning on the floor in the living room. I was bleeding from my nose. The gun was clutched in my right hand. I opened the cylinder. 2 rounds had been fired. I put it back in the box and headed outside. There was debris everywhere. One of my next door neighbors came out and commented on the storm that had happened the night before. Apparently it knocked out power for the whole block. Since then, I've been unable to sleep through the night. I never got nosebleeds before, but now I experience one a day for at least a few minutes. I've also noticed people treating me differently. Everyone is cordial, but no one seems willing to engage me in conversation for more than a few words. I feel like they're looking at me when I'm not focused on them. I don't really know how to process things. That ended far too soon. That one was quite intriguing. I like the build-up. Good atmosphere. But let me know what you thought in the comments beneath. You know those tales of bungee jumping gone wrong? Yeah, I thought they were just urban legends too. That was until I tried to take the plunge myself. Life had always been a whirlwind, but lately it felt like a tornado tearing through everything I held dear. The demands of my high-powered job in this bustling metropolis left me with little time for my family. My wife, Sarah, and I had once been inseparable, but the relentless pressure of everyday life had chipped away at our connection. Our love had turned into a mere routine, and the arguments had become more frequent and more toxic. Late-night meetings and early morning conference calls had become the norm. My kids, Lisa and Marco, grew distant, their laughter echoing less often through our home. I tried to make up for my absence with lavish gifts and weekend excursions, but I was merely patching up the cracks with
Band-Aids. One evening, after another heated spat that had ended with slammed doors and shattered glass, I found myself walking the lonely streets of our neighborhood. I needed air and space to think, to escape the confines of a crumbling marriage. The weight of our unresolved issues was crushing, and with each step my frustration grew. As I wandered aimlessly, my mind a tumultuous storm of regrets and frustrations, I stumbled upon an advertisement for an adventure weekend. Bungee jumping, it promised. A chance to leave everything behind, if only for a moment. The thought gnawed at me, a desperate attempt to rediscover the parts of myself that had been lost in the chaos of life. Without even realizing, I texted my old friend Fred, my confidant, the one who had been my rock through thick and thin. We had shared countless adventures in our youth, road trips to nowhere, camping in the middle of nothing, and that unforgettable backpacking trip through Europe. Fred had always been the one who brought out the spontaneous side of me, the side that had been buried beneath the weight of adult responsibilities. His response was instantaneous, a resounding, "I'm in, bud." We both needed a break from reality, a chance to reconnect and find ourselves again. The weekend couldn't come soon enough. And then the day arrived. The bridge loomed before us, an imposing yet exhilarating structure suspended over a deep, rocky gorge. The scenery was breathtaking, a stark contrast to the troubles we were leaving behind. I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins as I stood on the edge, Sarah's resentful words still echoing in my head. Fred clapped me on the back, a reassuring grin on his face. "You ready, Alex?" I nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, I need to do this." The instructor went through the safety protocols, and my heart raced as I realized the moment of truth was approaching. Fred and I stood side by side, nerves and excitement intertwining. As the countdown began, I glanced at him, and we shared a nod. In unison, we leapt off the edge, our shouts carried away by the wind. And then it happened. The initial freefall was exhilarating, a fleeting taste of freedom that swept away the weight of all my troubles. The wind roared in my ears, drowning out the cacophony of worries that had plagued me for months. For those precious seconds, it was just Fred and me, suspended between earth and sky, with nothing but the rush of adrenaline binding us together. But as the bungee cords reached their limits, reality began to distort. It started as a subtle shimmering at the edge of my vision, a trick of the mind that I dismissed as a product of my heightened state. However, the unease grew like a knot in my stomach, and panic clawed its way up my throat as the world around us twisted and warped. Colors became a frenzied whirlwind, merging and clashing in the chaotic dance. The ground below stretched into impossible shapes, and the sky above fragmented like a shattered mirror. I tore my gaze from the surreal panorama to look at Fred, hoping for some reassurance in his eyes. Except we didn't stop descending. Fear wrapped its icy fingers around my heart as I realized that something was horribly, terrifyingly wrong. The laws of physics, of reality itself, had been shattered. The bungee cords that should have rebounded us were no longer taut, but instead extended indefinitely, dragging us further into this nightmarish abyss. As we plummeted through the gaping maw of the void, my desperation swelled like a stormy sea. I clung to Fred, his grip on my hand the lone lifeline anchoring me to this ever-shifting reality. Day folded into night, and the passage of time became as malleable as the contorted scenery around us. We were adrift in a dimension where the laws of physics had frayed into impossibility. Even though everything was pitch black, we could still see as if we had all the light we needed. Fred's infectious laughter, the very sound that had carried us through countless escapades, was now but a haunting echo. His once vibrant spirit had dimmed, like a fading ember robbed of its fire. His gaze, once brimming with mischief and camaraderie, had turned hollow, as if his consciousness were slipping through the cracks of his fragmented existence. I screamed his name, a primal plea to seize him from the clutches of this eldritch descent, but my voice seemed to unravel into the cacophony of the swirling abyss around us. Amidst the surreal chaos, I clung to my phone, a fragile link to the world I had left behind. Its inexplicable battery level, frozen at 71%, became my sole connection to the semblance of normalcy. I etched marks on the fabric of time, using the device to anchor me in reality, even as reality itself warped beyond recognition. Desperately, I turned to the vast expanse of the internet, hoping to find someone who could help untangle the mystery that had entrapped us. However, the replies were few and far between. The people I once knew, my wife, my kids, they didn't even know I existed anymore. The familiar world I had known, along with its intricate web of human connections, had unraveled into an inexplicable puzzle, ensnaring me with this cosmic void. And so, if by some extraordinary chance you are reading this, heed my plea. If you've experienced this enigma that's overtaken my life, please reach out across this void and connect our worlds. I'm unraveling, my sense of self slipping like grains of sand through an open hand. My faithful friend Fred is fading too, his presence diminishing like a star swallowed up in the darkness of night. I stand at the edge of complete isolation, ready to fall endlessly through this shattered reality, devoured by the insatiable grasp of the void. These very well could be my last words. Please, help. What's that? You want another? Ungrateful. Fine, how about a longer one? This story is called Be Careful Seeking Shelter in a Blizzard. You never know what might be behind the door. A quick respite from the brutal cold was all I wanted, so the sight of a small building was enough to fill me with hope. A concrete gray slab in the distance broke through the monotony of uninterrupted, sprawling fields of white. It feels like I've been wandering for hours, but I know I wouldn't have lasted that long. I quickened my pace, squinting desperately for any sign of life. I mentally rehearsed the speech I'll give to them, half afraid my mind will be frozen over by the time I get there. The building nears, just as I feel my legs start to give. I muster the last of my strength to trudge through the thick snow separating us. Light pools out from the structure ahead. I attempt to look for any identifying sign for the building, but my view is too obstructed from all the snow. My knees buckle as I lurch into the door, leaning against it for support. I hammer my fist onto the thick metal. Please, is anyone in there? The icy wind gets caught in my throat, my shout coming out strained. Please, help me. My car broke down and my phone's not working. I've no idea where I am. My hand impatiently reaches to try the handle. To my luck, it turns. Warmth
instantly hits me as I swing open the door, immediate relief tingling all over my body. I peel my hands out of my soaking mittens and bring them up to my mouth, blowing all of the air that is left in my lungs to warm them up. A quick glance around the place reveals that it's a lobby of sorts. Brochures are lined neatly in little stands off to the side of a large wooden desk. A faint pine scent wafts through the air. There's a lit fireplace in the corner. I take a few steps towards it and my attention is turned to a bin in the corner labeled Lost and Found. God, I hope someone forgot their blanket. I begin walking over to it while scanning the rest of the area. There's no sign of anyone despite the lit fireplace. I dive my hands into the basket, pulling out a bundle of entangled, fur-lined jackets. I hastily separate them and hear something clatter to the ground. A flip phone lies at my feet. Grabbing it, I stare at the object for a moment, dumbfounded. Why would this be here? I flip it open. A single bar of signal dips in and out at the top of the screen. Oh, please, please work. The flimsy keyboard clacks as I pound 3 digits into it. My breath hitches in my throat as it begins ringing. A second passes. Dial tone. Fuck. I slam it into the counter in annoyance. Sweeping up the bundle of thick jackets, I make my way over to the fire. I peel off my soaking coat, tossing it and my own phone in front of the flames to dry. Hopefully the owners won't mind that I'm here. Maybe I should go introduce myself. The heat melts away my worries for a moment. Leaning forward, I close my eyes and let the warmth soothe my chilled bones. I feel myself begin to drift off, the comforting air lulling me to sleep. Thump. My eyes shoot open, darting to find the source of the sound. The door sits ajar past the reception desk. Thump. Hello? I stare at the visible crack in the door for any sign of life inside. Is anyone there? My voice blares over the soft crackling of the fireplace. Thump. I glance forward. I glance toward the front door as I make my way over. A blanket of white encompasses the plane, blocking all light from entering into the small room. The other windows are similarly blocked, piles of thick snow sealing the building in. I guess I'll have to make myself comfortable here. An uneasy feeling washes over me. I slowly push myself off the floor, patting my pocket to feel for my knife. I inch closer, feeling more and more unsure with each step. The building feels like it's going to collapse inward on top of me, suddenly feeling much smaller than before. Has it always been so cramped? Rough hail threatens to break the windows, pelting the building with sheets of snow. A faint sound emits from the dark, so light that I have to strain myself to hear it. A constant stream of liquid drops to the floor like a leaky faucet. I stare into the inky blackness seeping through the crack, straining my eyes in an attempt to see anything. My hand pauses around the doorknob, my focus stolen as a faint sound coming from the depths of the room in front of me. It sounds as though something slick and heavy is being dragged across the floor, a sickening, wet sound smearing across the tile. My legs move involuntarily, stammering backwards. Part of me wants to call out, plead for help, yet something instinctual tells me to hold my breath, stay quiet. The sound grows increasingly fainter as it sinks further into the room. A sudden high-pitched creaking pierces through the silence, followed by a soft click. I take it as a sign to allow myself to breathe. Seeing my hand flush against the door, I hesitate for a moment and reconsider what I'm about to do. Light trickles into the room as I begin to push it open, revealing a scene to me in small glimpses. This area seems to be an extension of the lobby, much larger than the room I had entered from. Small tables that held local craft goods are now toppled on the ground. Shards of glass shimmer in the darkness, a glittery highlight atop dark red smears across the floorboards. The footprints make it look like something was pacing. My body screams at me to leave, to hide, to try to claw my way out through the wall of snow blocking me in. The dripping continues, a little louder than before. My attention is directed far off to my right, landing on an ajar door spewing out a tauntingly golden beam of light. A pool of red sits between the entryway. A large sign labeled bathroom sits above it. Seeing no other option, I begin to creep over as quietly as possible. My steps are slow and steady as I make my best attempt to cling to the wall. Glass crunches softly under my feet, unavoidable. I cling to the doorframe and brace myself to peer around, immediately recoiling once I do. Smears of dark red decorate the floor, preserved shoe prints dancing in circles around the small space. The off-white walls are painted a sticky maroon, drops and specks decorating the untouched surface. Despite the amount of blood, absolutely no sign of a body or anything that would indicate what happened here remains. My feet move faster than my mind can react, turning in a desperate attempt to flee and run anywhere but here. But I then begin to feel myself gliding on the slick floor, and my legs tangle. My shoulder smashes into a sink basin on my descent, red-hot pain searing through the bone. In an instant, I'm on the floor, scrambling to my soaked knees and watching as my covered hands paint the ground I crawl upon. I drag myself towards the door, shooting pain ricocheting throughout my body with each movement. I stare out the gap and strain my eyes to see if whatever had been out there has come for me yet. Summoning the last of my strength, I launch myself from the ground, my shoes sliding wetly across the floor. My adrenaline-fueled heart jolts in my chest as I hear the door slam open to my right, bare feet smacking rapidly across the tile, like it was waiting there for this moment to strike. The pounding reaches just behind me as my hands flail desperately for the exit, rapid, animalistic breaths growing louder and louder until the frantic grasps brush against my neck. My hand grasps the handle as I practically throw myself into the room, swinging the door shut and slamming into it with my entire body weight. The world crashes to a sudden standstill. I remain flush against the door, filling my strained lungs with as many ragged breaths as I can manage to choke down. No resistance meets me on the other side. I try to gather the willpower to move, to crawl further away, to be anywhere but pressed against this door. Yet I remain rooted in place. I practice in my mind over and over the series of actions to grab the cabinet to my right, shoving it in my place and building a barricade of sorts. Yet a million what-ifs occur through my mind. What if it's still there? What if it's just waiting for me to move again? I can't just keep waiting here. One more moment passes before I project myself off the door, grabbing the dresser with practiced movements and flinging it where I had been. My body moves faster than my mind can process my actions as I stack more and more objects against the door. I lurch gracelessly in pain and strain against the weight of the tall bookshelf as I drag it closer and closer, paper cascading like an avalanche to the floor. My back begins to give as I finally rest it in front of my makeshift barricade. I recoil the moment I let go, walking backwards, trying to put any distance between myself and that door, while my chest heaves. The phone rang out suddenly with a piercing cry, filling the room with a high-pitched ringing. I whip around and stare at the object sitting on the floor. A rush of relief flushes over me as the ringtone continues to play. I take one more cautionary look at the door before sprinting over and scooping up the object. Fumbling with it in my hand, I clumsily flip it open and jam the green button. "Hello? Please, do you hear me?" I sob into the phone. Please help me, please. I don't know where. Hello? Please, do you hear me? My own voice plays back through the receiver. The phone nearly slips through my finger, my heart plunging into my stomach. The rest of my plea begins repeating back to me, interspersed with rapid, shallow breaths. Without thinking, I throw the phone across the room and run opposite of the door, shrinking against the wall and finding myself on the floor. My breathing runs rampant, uncontrollable, my lungs struggling to keep up as I hyperventilate. The soft sounds coming from the phone seem to mimic my own. My head whips around the room, searching for any possible escape or solution, yet I find nothing. It's either go face that thing, or struggle with the mountains of snow blocking the entrance, which would not be possible with my shoulder in such bad shape. I crawl over to the safety of the fireplace, curling into a ball and resigning myself to accept what may be my end. I bundle one of the jackets into a pillow and try my best to ignore the deep, ragged breaths coming from the other side of the room. Bang, bang, bang! My eyes shoot open and I instinctively shoot upright, backing myself further into the corner. Bang, bang! Hello? Anyone in there? A gruff voice calls from the front door. I propel myself off the ground as I run as fast as I can. I saw that the lights were on, and I cut him off, swinging the front door open and collapsing into his arms. My body convulses uncontrollably, heavy sobs flowing out of my throat. He hesitates before lightly putting his arms around me, leading me out and shutting the door. I close my eyes and shrink against him, reduced to being inconsolable. He lets go for a moment and begins reaching towards the door. An inhuman wail leaves my body, and I pull him backwards with what little strength remains inside of me. He acts like he's going to protest, but then he turns and looks at me, and the thought seems to die in his throat. Everything that happened next was a complete blur. We step out, and he leads me to his cabin. I explain everything to him through labored breaths as we walk, him listening and nodding sympathetically. He tells me that he's a neighbor, and he had noticed that he hadn't seen the woman that owns the shop leave before the storm hit. He'd also noticed the lights on, and her car still in the driveway. My sobs became more ragged as I collapsed a bit inward, leaning on him for support, and I tell him of the blood that I saw in the bathroom, and the state of disarray the shop had been in. He stills for a moment. He asks if I saw her or anyone else in the building, but my throat has closed completely, incapable of getting out any sound. He nods solemnly. At his cabin, he allows me to use his landline and get in contact with a tow truck while he calls the police on his cell phone. The man seems welcoming, allowing me to stay and recover in his guest room. The rest of the night went by in a blur between giving my statement and trying to locate where I had abandoned my truck. It's been about a month since the incident now. I still really don't have any answers for anything that happened during that blizzard. To my knowledge, they never found the woman that lived there, and when police had searched the building, it had been completely empty. Just the devastated, blood-spattered remains of the store lingered. I'm still working on processing everything. None of it feels real to me yet. I found myself doubting my memory of it frequently and just repeating the events that happened in my head over and over again. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined it all, but the occasional ache in my shoulder casts those doubts away. I've been doing my best to avoid the area, but have been slowly building more confidence driving there when I have to. Yet I still don't know if I will ever feel comfortable leaving the house when it's snowing ever again. Well then, an interesting tale. I wonder what happened to that woman. What happened to the store? Perhaps she was behind it. Maybe we have an unreliable narrator. Who knows? Let me know what you think in the comments below. It's a very interesting tale. What's that? You'd like to hear another one? All right. Greedy. If you meditate by yourself, never close your eyes. When I left the office on a cold, sunny Friday in February, I never could have imagined what awaited me at home. I put on my coat, threw my purse over my shoulder, and approached the exit, saying bye to my colleagues on the way out. My heels clicked on the fake hardwood floors as I left, but I was stopped as I reached the door. "Oh, you, heading out, Sophie?" a familiar, tentative voice said. I gently groaned. "Yeah, it's 5 p.m., I said flatly, looking at my watch. I looked over at the timid figure who represented my final barrier to weekend freedom. Jim meant well, but he clearly had a crush on me, despite being 20 years my senior. He was infamous among the women at the office for having a wandering stare that just bordered the other side of inappropriate. But overall, we saw him as harmless. He now stood before me, awkwardly scratching the back of his neck and wincing at his own words. "Could I grab us, or I mean you, a drink with me?" He choked out, barely hanging on. "No thanks, Jim. See you Monday." I hurried off. He'd had this exact same exchange with me a dozen times before, and I had no reservations about brushing him off. He'd flirted with some of the other women, but was more persistent with me. I let out a sigh of relief as I exited the building. As always, I took a side street because it was quieter and bordered the woods. I loved the smell of the trees and the sounds of the forest as I walked along. I had just started thinking about what to have for dinner when I heard a twig snap about 15 feet into the tree line. I stopped abruptly, squinting into the woods. There wasn't much light during February afternoons, and I struggled to see anything as I looked between the tree trunks. The forest was still, as if I had caught it red-handed. Hello? I called out, my mind immediately suspecting a serial killer, kidnapper, or a bear. Unsurprisingly, though, I received no answer, and I continued my walk home. I reached my front porch and slipped my key into the door. As I turned it, I felt absolutely no resistance. Holy shit, did I leave the door unlocked? I do that all the time, I suppose, and I thought nothing of it, except for maybe that I'd make a terrible mother. I walked inside, threw off my outside clothes, and slipped into the rattiest, oversized black t-shirt that I could find. It was a relic from high school that had stood the test of time. I walked into the bathroom, leaving the door open behind me, and started washing my face. Thump. I froze. I was using face cleanser, and if I opened my eyes, it would hurt like a bitch. I panicked and fumbled around, arms outstretched, looking for the door. Fuck, I thought. Just before I finally reached it, I felt an unfamiliar fabric graze my fingers. Was that my towel? I slammed the door shut, exhaled, and quickly rinsed off my face. There was no towel hanging from the door. I did a quick sweep of the house and unsurprisingly found nothing notable. The noise was probably just the house settling into place. What does that ever even mean? I was starving and immediately pushed my concerns away so I could start chopping onions. They always push their concerns away. As I reached for my go-to cutting knife, I noticed it was missing. I checked the sink and the dishwasher, both of which yielded no results. I'll figure it out after dinner, I thought. While cutting the onions, I managed to stop only twice to cry. While I was waiting for the water to boil, I decided to listen to a quick meditation. I slipped my earphones in. I sat cross-legged in the middle of my living room, ready to take in a guided meditation. I saw an email notification from YouTube advising one called Guided Meditation for Relaxing by Yourself at Home. I had unsubscribed from YouTube marketing emails, but this one got through. It seemed legit. I clicked on the video, which had literally 0 views. I'd never seen this channel, which also had 0 subscribers. But I decided that I'd give it a chance. I closed my eyes and absorbed myself into the meditation. A somewhat familiar male voice came on, but I didn't pursue the association. And get nice and comfortable as you focus only on my voice and your breath. In deeply. Out. For just a little longer than you breathed in. And as you feel your thoughts disappear, ask yourself why the door was unlocked. My eyes shot open. What the fuck? I shouted aloud, looking around the living room. There's no way I heard that right. I closed all the curtains, flipped the lights on, locked the doors and windows, and checked on my pot of water before going back into the living room. Tentatively, I picked up my phone and looked at the video. The channel had a blank description and had only posted one video. My heart pounded. I went back and I listened again. Really feel each part of your body. Observe and scan your body for sensation, your toes, ankles, knees. The video droned on, completely normal. I was thoroughly confused. Obviously, I needed to take more paid time off. I went to the kitchen, poured myself a healthy serving of wine, and returned to my meditation. This woman does not see red flags. Moving up to your hands, ask yourself when you last paid attention to your hands. Rub your thumb against your index finger, then your middle finger, ring finger, then your pinky. And ask yourself, how would you get on if I cut each of those fingers off? For the second time, I opened my eyes wildly and threw myself to my feet. I checked the video. This is either some fucked up genre, or my thoughts were interrupted by a sinking realization. The channel icon was surrounded in red, meaning the meditation I was watching was a live stream. With shaking fingers, I put an earphone back in, completely terrorized at this point. And as this meditation comes to a close, reflect on past relationships. Is there someone in your life you're neglecting? Are you being an ungrateful fucking bitch who can't see that what she needs is right in front of her? My whole body started trembling as my vision swam and the lights shut off. Thump, 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 thump. I screamed as footsteps closed in on me. The intruder was in the room with me, brandishing my knife. I threw myself to the left to avoid his path. As he turned towards me, I scrambled to my feet and ran into the kitchen, looking around for something, anything at all, as I heard him clamber towards the kitchen entrance. You were everything to me, Jim screamed in a horrifying voice. If you just looked and seen what we could have had, I wouldn't have had to do this. Why do I always do this? He yelled, the final sentence coming out in a quiet, strained voice, and more as a question to himself. As he emerged from the darkness of the living room into the kitchen light, I used the only weapon that I had. What are you... He let out before I doused him in the boiling water. He let out an agonized scream as the steaming liquid struck him in the face, which he clutched at in despair. As he laid on the floor, I ran upstairs, clutching my phone and frantically dialing 911. If you meditate by yourself, never close your eyes, and be wary of seemingly harmless people. Welcome. Today's story is called I Shouldn't Have Let the Stray Inside. Let me start off by saying that no, this is not some PTSD-induced incident. No, it's not the stress. No, I'm not crazy, and you need to listen to me before this happens to someone else. It all started several weeks ago, during the best day of my life. The day I found out that I was pregnant with my first child. Everything was amazing. We called both of our parents. We celebrated, and we were filled with joy and amazement. Then we went to the doctor. Everything was fine with the child, but there was one problem. You see, when I was 8, I was diagnosed with a generalized anxiety disorder, and I was prescribed alprazolam. This could cause complications with the pregnancy, and I could no longer take the drug. Instead, I would swap over to a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor that would still work without affecting my baby. So I swapped over to the new medication and went on with my life. Now, it didn't work as well as the previous ones, and I'd still find myself being a little bit overwhelmed now and then, but I could cope with it. During all this, my husband, Greg, was amazing. He did everything to make my life easier, from the big things like taking over most of the chores at the house, to small things like rubbing my feet after a long day of work. Just staring into the deep wells of his bright blue eyes would make my worries disappear. He was my rock. Then we got an unexpected phone call. Greg's father, Travis, has had a nasty fall in his garage, damaging his spinal cord. He needed emergency surgery, and even in the best case, he would be bound to a wheelchair for several months. Travis lives down in Florida, and he had nobody to help take care of him. So we did the only thing that we could. Greg took a leave from work, and he flew down to Florida to take care of him while he recovered after his surgery. While it might sound selfish, all I was worried about at this time was what was I going to do without him. And soon that tiny house we lived in began to feel like a giant, empty mansion. And I never felt as alone as I did in those weeks. I would come home every day after work for some microwaved food or order out from some delivery service. And then I would sit alone on the couch and watch TV until I fell asleep. Wake up and do it all again the next day. Not the healthiest thing for an expecting mother, I realize. And then one particularly stormy night, as I was coming home from work, the rain was cascading down. It seemed like some sort of torrential rainfall or terrifying storm that was blowing in. The wind was howling, thunder cracked in the distance, a freezing gust blew through the neighborhood. The trees swayed, bent, and cracked under the weight of that wind. It seemed like it would be one hell of a storm, and then I saw it, sitting in the corner of the driveway, this little black thing, a little cat. He looked so small, drenched by this torrential downpour. I felt so bad for the little guy. He must be so cold. So I got out of the car, quickly ran over to him, and surprisingly, he didn't flinch or run away at all. He just sat there, staring at me with those large amber eyes. I quickly scooped him up into my arms and carried him inside. He looked a bit malnourished. He was thin and scrawny, with fur matted against his body, completely soaked. So I got out my hairdryer and a towel. I set it to the low setting and dried the cat. Got him some food, an old can of tuna that we had sitting in the cupboard. Now at first the cat was somewhat catatonic. It seemed that the severe cold and malnourishment left him in a bit of a daze. But I tried very gently, gave him some food. I put him in an old cardboard box with a blanket inside. I left him alone so that he could rest. After my escapades with the animal, I made myself a quick microwavable dinner, turned on the TV, and I sat down. Eventually, the pictures on the screen began to blur as my eyes began to droop down, with the relaxing pitter-patter of the rainfall and howling winds outside. My eyelids drooped lower and lower, till I drifted off into dreams. But this dream was different. It was a strange dream, something I'd never felt before, and I awoke with a start, terrified. My heart was beating out of my chest, and my breath was coming hard and fast. It was a nightmare like I've never felt before. Now, I don't remember any monsters or people hunting me down or anything like that. Not even a visual from the dream. The only thing I could recall was a feeling of something watching me, something very, very hungry watching me. I jerked open my eyes and looked around in a panic. I froze as my blood ran cold. Sitting next to me on the couch was that little cat, staring up at me with those large amber eyes. I noticed these eyes weren't normal. There was something wrong with them, something all too human in them. I freaked out. I jumped up and backed up away from it. Now please, don't judge me too hard for this, but I ran out of the room, opened the front door, grabbed a broom from the cupboard, and chased the cat out of my house into that dark, cold rainstorm. Then I slammed the door shut behind me and locked it tight. Only when that strange animal was outside could I relax again. Eventually, when I sat back down on the couch and started thinking it all through, I felt so stupid. It was just a cat. That weird, human-like intelligence behind its eyes was just in my imagination. Just some leftover from the nightmare that I had had. Honestly, reacting that badly, I shouldn't have chased him out at all. But I figured it was too late now, and after about an hour of sitting on the couch and drearily watching more shows, I fell asleep again. And when I woke up in the morning, I'd all forgotten about the cat, so I got off the couch and did my normal morning routine. I had a shower, got dressed, made myself some breakfast. Then I got ready to leave. When I reached for the handle to open my front door, something was wrong. I heard something moving outside the door. It wasn't big. It wasn't a loud sound. It was as if some small animal had started running away from my front door. Only then did I remember the cat from the night before. I started to feel bad. The poor animal must have been out there all night, trying to avoid the rainstorm. I could hear him running away, but there's not much I could do at this point. So I opened the door, took my keys, and went to work. From then on, though, it kept happening. Every time I got home from work, I would be able to hear the cat around somewhere just out of my sight. Somewhere in the background, but never visible. When I would leave for work, I would hear him run away from the door. When I got back, he would run into the bushes in the corner of the driveway. I didn't really see the cat again, not for at least 2 weeks. But I could always hear him, and it bothered the hell out of me. I did attempt to befriend him again. I got some catnip from a local pet store and some cat food which I left outside. I hoped maybe I could repair the damage I did in this relationship with this cat. But things didn't get better. In fact, they got a lot worse. Eventually, I did see the cat again. I was making dinner for myself, and outside the window of the kitchen, I saw it sitting there in the corner, in the shadows. Those large amber eyes stared up at me from the bushes, and it filled me with some strange dread. Those eyes looked wrong. The moment our eyes met, he bolted back into the bushes, into the shadows, disappearing from my view. And this pattern continued. At times, when I would think I was all alone, I would get the strange feeling of being watched. I would take the initiative and start searching, and I would always, invariably, find those large amber eyes staring back at me, through a window or a crack in the door. The only place I felt safe was in my bedroom, so I stopped watching TV at night. And then, even that changed. You see, after a particularly bad day at work, I felt so overwhelmed that when I got home, I just wanted to fall asleep and forget the rest of the world. Then I heard some scratching, as if on the window. That wasn't possible. I was on the second floor of the house. There was a window, but there were no trees outside of it. There was no easy way to access this. It isn't something that you could have easily climbed to. Yet I heard something at that window. And when I looked over, I saw that large pair of amber eyes staring at me. But then they bolted. They dropped down 2 stories to the ground, miraculously, and then ran off into the shadows again. This wasn't possible. How the hell would it even have gotten to the window? At that point, I'd had enough. I called the pest control specialist and told him there was a stray cat in my yard and I wanted it gone. A large, burly man came one day in a beat-up truck. He screeched down the driveway, pulling it to a stop. The man peeled himself out of the car, a large and overweight man that seemed covered in scratches and scars from who knows what critters. He seemed perfect for what I needed. I told him there was this cat and I needed it to go away. It doesn't matter how. He looked at me and I could tell he was thinking I was a hysterical Karen type, but I didn't care. He said with a grunt, "Sure, I'll handle it. I'll put up some traps. It'll be gone by morning." But the strange thing is, I never did see the man again. He placed some traps around the yard and whatnot, but he never came around to collect them. I called his company's number, but nobody ever answered, and I had to assume that possibly he'd left town or forgotten all about my job altogether. But to his credit, the cat didn't show up again. At least not for a week. But then he did return, and it was so much worse. You see, he stopped hiding as much from me. I would catch him watching me more often, and when our eyes met, he would wait for a bit, watch, and turn around and walk away slowly. The more he watched me, the more I watched him back, and the more I noticed strange things about this cat. Yes, it had those human-like eyes, but there was more to it than that. Now that I stared at it, paying attention, I noticed that its front legs were longer than they should be. They honestly look a lot more like the length of a human arm. It just tucked them into its fur so that you wouldn't notice normally. Then there were its paws. I could swear it looked like they were almost thumb-like growths on the sides of them. Honestly, at that point I was pretty scared, so I called another pest control specialist. After a few days, they told me that there were no cats around. They couldn't find anything, and there was nothing to remove. Bloody idiot. So I tried another company, and then another. At that point, I had tried 7 different pest control agents, and none of them could find this bizarre cat. But strangely, at this point, I was starting to get less scared of the creature. It did deeply disturb me, but at the same time, it was always at a distance. It never approached me. Sure, it watched me, and that scared me, but it never did anything. So even though I saw it, I stopped feeling threatened. I just felt that it was wrong, so I decided that I would put it out of my head. That it was a source of stress I didn't need, and that I would ignore the animal and forget all about it. It largely helped. Even though I kept seeing the creature, I stopped getting scared. I stopped really doing anything about it. I just figured that it was a weird cat, and eventually it'll leave me alone. But that was a mistake. I should have gotten the hell out of there. I should have gotten a gun and shot the bloody thing. I don't know what I should have done, but I shouldn't have done what I did. Because the cat started getting more comfortable. It stopped running away when it caught my gaze. It stopped fleeing any time that I was near it. I would find it watching me for longer, but I just kept ignoring it. And then one night, I awoke in the early morning, but something was very, very wrong. I opened my eyes and looked around the room. It was dark, but I could still see a faint light coming from the curtains. But I couldn't move. My arms wouldn't respond. My legs didn't move. I couldn't roll over or move my head. I couldn't do anything. All I could do was blink. Now, at first, I panicked. I was freaking out. I tried desperately to figure out what was happening. But after a few minutes, I realized this had happened before, when I was a child. There were a few nights when I was affected by sleep paralysis, where I would wake up for a few minutes. I just wouldn't be able to move at all. Eventually, though, I would regain control of my body, so I'll be fine. I just have to wait it out and not stress. So I lay there for a few seconds until a sound broke the dead silence of the night. The sharp sound of breaking glass. But no footsteps. No sound of people, nothing like that. Just breaking glass. Then the door handle moved. There were no footsteps, just the rattle of the handle. The door slowly pushed open, and with a loud creak, a small black form slithered in the room. A pair of glowing amber eyes caught my gaze, and I could swear you could see a small, furry grin on its cat-like muzzle. At that moment, I could see in its eyes not just a human-like intelligence, but a hunger. Next, the creature did something so bizarre. It stood up on its hind legs, and slowly, with the grace of an old-timey gentleman, sauntered over to the bed, disappearing from my view. Then something slithered into the bed underneath the covers. I could see it. I couldn't move or even scream, but I could hear the crinkle of the bed sheets as it pushed its way towards me. Then an excruciating pain filled my stomach. The pain was unbearable, never-ending, like something was tunneling through my flesh until eventually I blacked out. I awoke in a blood-soaked bed. With a shaky hand, I grabbed my cell phone and dialed an ambulance. After hours of tests, the doctors told me I had a sleep paralysis incident, leading to a panic attack, which caused a miscarriage. I was in a horrible state, full of fear and deep hatred for that monster. I wanted nothing more than revenge. So I left the hospital and I went to a gun store. Apparently I couldn't buy a gun that day, but I could get a crossbow. So I bought what I could get, a hunting crossbow with some bolts, and I headed home. But that thing didn't show up. I waited for hours. So I sat down at my computer and started writing this, crossbow at my side, waiting for the familiar feeling of being watched. After hours, I finally did feel it again, and I looked out my window to see not one, but 2 pairs of eyes. One glowing amber, one sky blue. The exact same shade of sky blue I've seen 1,000 times before in my husband's eyes. I froze, staring at the uncanny human intelligence of the sky blue eyes, and felt a strange familiarity to it. After a few seconds, the pair fled back into the shadows, leaving me sitting here in tears. What should I do? Quite the tale. There are many mysteries that I cannot explain about this one, but I think it goes without saying that was no regular cat. It's called What Do You Call Someone with No Body and No Nose? Sam, what do you call someone with no body and no nose? I had braced myself for whatever asinine statement was going to come out of Charlie's mouth as I'd heard his diminutive footsteps bounding into the living room. But this was dumb, even for his standards. The 9-year-old had no shortage of absolutely stupid observations, musings, and yes, God help me, jokes that he would dole out at a moment's notice. If we're really, totally, completely honest here, gun to my head, I couldn't stand that little shit. Kids just weren't my thing. Never have been.
Never would be. They're just annoying. You can't have a conversation with them. They're always sticky. They're always yelling. Kids are really just obnoxious little morons. There probably isn't anyone on Earth less suited to the art of babysitting than me. Now, I know what you're thinking. You hate kids. You've done nothing but whine about them. Why the hell are you a babysitter? Well, on summer break in Vernon, there wasn't much a 17-year-old could do for work, aside from waitressing down at the Empty Tanker. I was not waitressing down at the Empty Tanker. Not unless I wanted to spend my whole summer getting harassed by day-drunk truckers for penny tips. We'd lived next door to the McChutchins my entire life, and so they'd call on me at any time when they were in a jam and needed a sitter for Charlie. I hate kids, but $50 is $50. Mr. McChutchin had knocked on our door that afternoon and offered double the usual rate to watch Charlie for a few hours that evening. It was an emergency, and they hadn't had time to set up the sitting in advance. But seeing the dollar signs, I readily accepted. I regretted my decision almost immediately. Charlie had been especially aggravating that night. From the moment I'd walked in, he'd been running around like a chicken with its head cut off, slamming Lego spaceships into the ground and begging me for lollipops. It wasn't long before I reached my limit. After dumping an entire bag of lollipops on the floor in Charlie's playroom, I devised a new game that he was all too eager to play. Take all your Legos apart and put them back together one by one while I watched TV in the living room. The game was going really well until Charlie exploded into the room, hopping onto the couch next to me with several lollipops sticking out of his gullet, interrupting the trash TV rerun that had me enraptured. He ripped them out excitedly, sticky spit flying in all directions and dripping onto his hand. I scowled, unable to hide my annoyance. "I thought we were playing a game," I said sternly. I got bored. "I already built those Legos. What do you call someone with no body and no nose?" He repeated the question, staring up at me expectantly as he sucked on his bundle of lollipops. I rolled my eyes. The easiest solution here was just to play along with a stupid joke and then put the little bastard to bed. "I don't know," I answered. "What?" "Nobody no-knows," Charlie exclaimed, throwing his hands up for emphasis. I wrinkled my nose. That doesn't even make sense. What kind of joke is that? Charlie looked at me like I was an idiot. "It's not a joke," he finally said. "It's nobody no-knows." "No," I corrected him. "It's nobody knows. Get it? Nobody knows. It's a stupid joke. At least tell it right." Charlie's face twisted into an exasperated frown. "It's not a joke, Sam," he whined, elongating the middle of my name. I hated when he did that. "His name is Nobody No-Knows. He has no body and no nose. He lives in my closet." The fuck? I stared at Charlie incredulously. The kid had never had any weird imaginary friends like that before. Were the McChutchins raising some kind of schizo serial killer? "No, he doesn't. That's an imaginary friend. And it's time for bed anyway. I'd had enough of this shit for tonight. Mr. and Mrs. McChutchin would probably be home soon anyway. It was a good enough excuse to put the little freak down. Charlie crossed his arms in a huff. "But I'm not tired," he exclaimed. "I don't care," I answered. "Your mom and dad are gonna be back soon anyway. Come on." I stood and grabbed his arms, leading him up the stairs. "Well," Charlie mumbled as we ascended the steps, "maybe you can see him now. He's probably awake anyway." I shook my head, annoyed. As we reached Charlie's darkened bedroom, though, I was slightly creeped out at the sight of his tightly shut closet door. It was a pretty big closet. I reached to flick the light on, and Charlie grabbed the bottom of my shirt, stopping me. "Don't," he hissed. He doesn't like being woken up that way. That made my skin crawl a little. Charlie was acting like a fucking weirdo. "Stop being dumb," I commanded, and flicked on the lights. Immediately there was a soft rustling from within the closet. I froze and looked at Charlie. He simply shrugged. A gesture of, "I told you so." What was this little fucker playing at? Did he have an animal trapped in here or something? Was he systematically vivisecting some poor neighborhood cat? Slowly, I crept over to the closet door and swung it open. "The hell are you hiding in here?" My heart caught in my throat as the closet's interior was exposed to the light. Inside the closet, laying on the floor, was a giant severed head. It was vaguely humanoid in appearance, with sallow and sickly-looking yellow skin. It was gigantic, bigger than a beach ball or even a massive Halloween pumpkin. It was a nearly perfectly round orb, with small pinprick holes on the side where an ear would be on a normal human head. Its enormous mouth hung open in a gaping, slack-jawed O, revealing rows of sharp, needle-like teeth. Between its eyes and mouth was a smooth patch of that yellow skin. No other distinguishing features. Charlie had a giant, nearly featureless, severed head in his closet. No body, no nose. Before I could scream, before I could think, before anything, its eyes shot open. Two massive black orbs ascended with murky, brownish, slitted reptilian pupils. The eyes locked with mine, and the thing let out a hideous screech, its mouth growing even wider than before. It had been sleeping, and I'd woken it up. "Charlie, what the fuck is this?" I screamed as I frantically backed away from the hideous abomination in the closet. "That's nobody no knows," Charlie exclaimed matter-of-factly. "I was playing by a creek a few days back with Richie and Ted, and we found him in that big pipe. We were looking for crickets, and he was just laying there in the dirty water." My blood turned to pure ice. Richie and Ted didn't really like him. Charlie sounded sad. But I told him he could stay. He's funny. The emergency. The reason the McChutchins had gone out that evening. A couple of kids from around Vernon had gone missing recently. There was a huge search party going on as we spoke. A desperate attempt to locate them. Another pained wail came from the closet. I turned to see nobody no knows floating in midair. The thing could levitate, apparently. I guess that's how it got around with no body. The freakish orb hovered towards me, spittle dripping from its mouth. Fuck. I mumbled to myself, my feet feeling as if they were made out of cement. "Sam is my friend," Charlie suddenly yelled as the creature came within inches of my face. It stopped in its tracks, turning its lizard eyes to Charlie. I took my chance. I raised a leg and kicked at the thing, catching it off guard and sending it flying backwards. I grabbed Charlie and rushed out of the room, slamming the door behind me. "Why did you do that?" Charlie screamed. "He's gonna be mad." "Shut up, shut up," I demanded as we raced down the steps. "We need to get the fuck out of here." As we bounded into the foyer, the front door suddenly swung open and Mr. and Mrs. McCutcheon were back. The couple wore grim facial expressions, which turned to confusion as they saw us land in a heap at the bottom of the stairs. "Sam?" Mrs. McCutcheon addressed me quizzically. "Is everything okay? We need to leave now, like right now, like immediately." Before he could answer, the sound of a wooden door shattering turned our attention to the stairs. An inhuman screech reverberated off the walls, and nobody no nose floated down the steps towards us. Mrs. McCutcheon screamed in horror. Her husband's eyes grew wide. "What in the fuck?" he began. The creature glided towards Mr. McCutcheon, much faster than the speed at which it had approached me, and in an instant it had unhinged its jaw and clamped down on his head. There was a wet squelch as those pinprick teeth punctured the soft flesh of Mr. McCutcheon's neck, a dull crunch as the monster crushed his skull. The stench of copper filled the room as reams of dark blood cascaded down over Mrs. McCutcheon's body, leaking from the side of the creature's mouth. "Daddy?" Charlie cried out in horror as nobody no-nos released what was left of his father's body, the corpse crumpling into a heap that was rapidly gushing crimson. I slapped a hand over my mouth, not even able to muster a scream. On the other hand, Mrs. McCutcheon screamed bloody murder and had gone sheet white, hands around the sides of her face. She was in pure disbelief at the sight in front of her. The creature faced her now, her husband's blood and bits of viscera staining its wide face and dripping from its lips. The woman turned to run. Her fight or flight mode activated, she sprinted into the living room, the thing in hot pursuit. It didn't take long to catch her at all. Her screaming was cut short, and I could only imagine a similar feeding to the one that I had just witnessed was occurring out of the line of our vision. There was only silence now. Charlie wept, clinging to my leg, crying for his mommy and daddy. I didn't know what to do. I was afraid that any movement I made would be an invitation for that thing to float back into the room and wrap those jaws around my head next. After what felt like an eternity had passed, we heard shaky and unsteady footsteps on the hardwood, making their way back into the foyer. Into the room stepped Mrs. McCutcheon? Only not. Atop the body of the woman I'd called a neighbor since childhood was the bulbous and jaundiced cranium of nobody no-nos. Blood flowed down what had once been Mrs. McCutcheon's body, starting from her freshly torn neck hole, the hole that
Nobody No-No's had set itself upon. It was almost comedic, the giant monstrous head perched on such a petite frame. The head bobbed from side to side as the creature tried to steady itself on its new legs. Slowly, it strode towards us, eyes locked with mine. For the first time that night, it smiled, showing off its red-stained teeth in a wide grin. Charlie continued his wailing, mixed with some nearly unintelligible muttering. "Why did you do that?" he cried. "I thought we were friends. I thought we were friends." The kid sounded so hopeless and terrified and lost, but who could blame him? Nobody No-No's outstretched his arm towards me, grunting expectantly. I understood what he wanted instantly. Did I really have a fucking choice? Wordlessly, and through his screeching protests, I pried Charlie off my leg and handed him over to the monster that had eaten his parents. Nobody No-No's wrapped Charlie in a tight hug and growled in approval, pressing the child against the sopping wet clothes stained by his mother's blood. The creature gave me one last look before bounding out of the foyer on its shaking and unbalanced legs. I heard a window shatter in the distance as they made their way into the night, Charlie's screams eventually evaporating into nothing. As I sunk to the floor, I clutched my knees to my chest, sitting at the foot of the stairs next to Mr. McCutcheon's headless corpse. I attempted to process what just happened. Suddenly, the front door swung open once again, and I was face to face with my father. "Sam," he exclaimed. "We heard screaming. We heard a window break. What the hell is going on?" He trailed off, mouth going slack as he surveyed the carnage of the room. He stared at me, wide-eyed, unable to speak. It felt like I was floating in another universe, like I was watching my own dream. Tears streamed down my own eyes as I began to laugh uncontrollably, a maniacal and insane laugh. "Hey, Dad," I said breathlessly, barely able to even speak in my fit of gut-busting hysterics. "What do you call someone with no body and no nose?" Howling at the Moon by Johnwestrick. There's nothing quite as beautiful as seeing the silvery light of the moon reflecting off the lake. Its lonely glow used to instill fear in me. Now the idea of a full moon gets my blood pumping. This night is no exception. There will be excruciating pain for the first few minutes, but that will fade. In its place will be the clarity of the hunt. My vision will sharpen in the darkness, and my nose will pick up scents I didn't even know existed until now. No drugs compare to the exhilaration one receives while on the heels of prey. I can hear its heart beating faster as the fear sets in. I look and see the shifting gaze in its eyes. It thinks to run, but it doesn't know that I was forged for the chase. This is the law of nature. The strong live and the weak die. I pull up right behind, then I fall away. This hunt is too short. I like to draw it out. It runs on 2 legs. How stupid. Does it not know that it could move twice as fast on all 4s? It's Quick for a human. Much faster than me. The moon is shining bright tonight, which means I'm in my true form. There is no hope for him. He makes a wrong turn in the forest of stone. This forest is strange, not like any of the others. The trees touch the sky, and the bark is made of rock. It matters not, because there's plenty of food here. The weak ones think they are safe in their nests of stone and metal. Sometimes they are, but this one made a mistake. He went between two of them and trapped himself in the alleyway. Now, he's mine. I look up to see the moon, nearly hidden behind the sky trees, and let out one more howl. Tonight, it's the howl of victory. Another night filled with meat and blood. I howl now, because tomorrow I may not get the chance. I have a feeling our narrator may have been biased in that story. Let me know what you think in the comments beneath. And I do hope that you'll join me in the future for more Frail Blaze tales.